that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. himself has fingered aluminum vaccine adjuvants as a major cause of the chronic illness epidemic in the United States, and is also a likely leading factor in the vaccine autism link. So the fact that Jim O'Neill would market the very thing that RFK Jr. has linked to these conditions as a treatment for neurodegenerative disease tells you a lot about the guy. And that I think a lot of his ambitions are very counter to the idea of making America healthy again. If one of the key culprits per RFK in this chronic illness epidemic is something that he thinks can be deceptively marketed as a cure, it's very crazy.
Beware! Jim O'Neill is marketing a cure made from the substance RFK Jr. has linked to widespread chronic illness. That's the latest warning from investigative journalist Whitney Webb. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been vocal about aluminum vaccine adjuvants being a major factor in America's chronic illness epidemic and a potential link to autism. Despite this, Jim O'Neill is pushing the same substance as a treatment for neurodegenerative disease. For Whitney, it's a glaring contradiction. If aluminum is a cause of widespread health issues, marketing it as a cure feels more like a deceptive play than a real solution. O'Neill's approach raises serious questions about his priorities. Is he interested in making America healthier, or is he banking on ignorance to push a questionable product? Make sure to stick around until the end of the video, as Whitney Webb provides more valuable insights. Also guys, only a small percentage of my viewers subscribe. If you enjoy staying updated with finance content, consider subscribing or liking the video. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Now, here's Whitney Webb as she exposes this issue.
So my focus tends to be on policy and policy agendas, and I think, especially coming out of an electoral season, people tend to get very invested in people, and sometimes people don't necessarily stick to policy agendas they promoted on the campaign trail. I think myopically focus on some of the narratives around the people at the expense of paying attention to the policy agendas they ostensibly oppose. As it relates to things like mRNA technology, for example, a lot of people that have been pretty prominent in opposing that have sort of glossed over some of the statements recently from people like Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle at the White House, talking about personalized mRNA cancer vaccines. A lot of people that railed against mRNA technology a year or two ago have been unusually silent about that. Of course, not everyone, but some have, presumably at the expense of, they don't want to necessarily criticize the incoming administration, but there are some, troubling signs as it relates to mRNA technology specifically. And if this was a major reason for people backing the Make America Healthy Again movement in particular, which has been credited with a lot of Trump's electoral success more recently, it's important to note that that policy agenda does matter to voters, and sort of focusing on, confirming this person or that person, or as long as this person got in, everything will magically be fine. I mean, that doesn't necessarily happen, as we know that in politics, a lot of deal making happens, a lot of backpedaling can happen, a lot of compromises happen that can, be at the expense of those policy agendas that voters really cared about. And so, I tend to focus on the policy agendas and sort of try and avoid a lot of the focus on politicians specifically, because, I think it happened with Obama, I think it's happened with Trump to an extent, this idea of hope and change and sort of these savior politics that as long as, we get the right person in the White House, we can all sit back in our armchairs and trust the plan. I kind of reject that. I think it's up to everybody to focus on policy agendas that they oppose, and if those start to be pushed through, that they get vocal about it, regardless of who's pushing about it or making excuses for it. I guess that has ruffled some feathers in my case, and not necessarily cheerleading people, has gotten me called a lot of names recently, but ultimately, I'm concerned about certain policy agendas, and I haven't changed in that. So a lot of the policy agendas I've been focused on for years really is the expansion of mass surveillance, the erosion of civil liberties, the imposition of technocracy, and also the imposition of this biotechnology that is deceptively marketed as safe and effective, when we learned during COVID it is neither of those things. We'll talk about today as it relates to Jim O'Neill. There's efforts, his big push is to eliminate efficacy testing. for drugs and vaccines, which would be a total gift to the biotechnology products that produced mRNA, because essentially what's been known for years since this technology first emerged around 2010 is that you can either make them safe but not effective, or you can make them effective but incredibly toxic. And so by eliminating efficacy tests, you can flood this on the market. If you look into this guy's background, it's unlikely there will be any sort of imposition of rules that would prevent deceptive marketing of those things. So again, if people are concerned in the MAHA movement, particularly about mRNA technology, it's important to look at the policy action and not so much the policy rhetoric if you want to avoid interacting with those type of substances at all, personally.
So who is Jim O'Neill, and why should we know about him, and why should we be concerned?
Right. So as I noted in the piece, Jim O'Neill has a kind of lengthy career that spans both private venture capital scene, and also before that, he had a stint at HHS as well during the George W. Bush era, where he was the top speechwriter for Tommy Thompson and later Mike Leavitt. And, under Tommy Thompson, he was head of HHS during the anthrax attacks and pushed for a lot of this legislation that used as justification the 2001 anthrax attacks to push through things like emergency use authorization, which have justified under emergency. So a lot of that history goes back to piggybacking off the 2001 anthrax attacks, which, if anyone's familiar with that, was essentially a false flag attack quickly tied back to the U.S. military, even though attempts were made to blame it on Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda back when the anthrax attacks first occurred. And if anyone's familiar or would like to know more about that, you can look at my series, Engineering Contagion, that I wrote several years ago during the COVID era. About that specifically. As top speechwriter, writing those speeches for Tommy Thompson before Congress, for example, Jim O'Neill was involved in manufacturing consent for that type of legislation and that deregulatory paradigm that was justified by the anthrax attacks, and also the fear-mongering around the bird flu scare that was roughly between 2004 and 2006.
The White House promotes personalized mRNA cancer vaccines, but many critics of mRNA technology are oddly silent. For those backing the Make America Healthy Again movement, this raises serious red flags. Jim O'Neill, about to become Deputy Secretary of HHS, would oversee critical operations and push his deregulatory agenda. He advocates eliminating efficacy testing for drugs and vaccines, which could unleash untested biotech products onto the market. O'Neill's history at HHS, including during the 2001 anthrax scare, shows a pattern of deregulation tied to emergency powers. With mRNA now being integrated into food supply chains and private insurance schemes, this agenda could quietly expand biotech use without mandates. Now let's go back to what Whitney has to say.
And a lot of that fear-mongering was piggybacking off of the statistics of incredibly discredited people like Neil Ferguson of the Imperial College of London, who of course created those doomsday statistics about COVID-19 that justified a lot of the lockdowns and other things. And the extreme fear-mongering, and as well as this legislation that O'Neill helped manufacture consent for, created this entity at HHS called BARDA, which is responsible for purchasing large amounts of big pharma products under the guise of stockpiling them for emergencies. And so that was passed, and then this bird flu panic was falsely generated largely off of the fear-mongering of speeches of HHS secretaries. And in doing so, they pushed for billions of dollars spent on the purchase of Tamiflu. Tamiflu is an antiviral manufactured by Gilead. At the time, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld had previously been chairman of Gilead, held an insane amount of stock in Gilead, and made over $25 million as a consequence of this huge pump and dump, basically, in Gilead stock that was, a direct consequence of the mass government purchasing of Tamiflu stockpiles that was never ultimately needed. It was basically a scam. And a lot of BARDA stockpiling over this fear-mongering of the next pandemic and all of that, a lot of these antecedents, Jim O'Neill first established in his public sector career, and then he leaves. By the way, he was also on the BARDA steering committee when those decisions were made to purchase Tamiflu. So I note his current ties to biotechnology companies in the piece, and the most glaring of those is his membership on the board of directors of this company called Advantage Therapeutics. And Advantage Therapeutics is essentially marketing injections of pure aluminum, which is a known neurotoxin, and trying to market that as a cure or treatment for Alzheimer's disease, which of course is a neurodegenerative condition. And there's actually no data linking the injection of aluminum into better outcomes for Alzheimer's patients. Basically, what happened, the people behind this company previously tried to create a vaccine to treat Alzheimer's, and in the study, the control group did much better than the group that received that vaccine, but the control group was given the vaccine minus its active component, just the vaccine adjuvant or immunostimulant, which was this aluminum product. And they claim that because the control group did better, that must mean that the aluminum is a treatment for Alzheimer's. And so they got the patent rights to it and attempted to monetize it. And Jim O'Neill was brought on the board specifically to market this, to get this particular product onto the market despite no data. And despite the fact that it's a known neurotoxin, and aluminum specifically has been investigated as a causative factor in the onset of Alzheimer's. And going even beyond that is the fact that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. himself has fingered aluminum vaccine adjuvants as a major cause of the chronic illness epidemic in the United States, and is also a likely leading factor in the vaccine autism link. So the fact that Jim O'Neill would market the very thing that RFK Jr. has linked to these conditions as a treatment for neurodegenerative disease tells you a lot about the guy. And that I think a lot of his ambitions are very counter to the idea of making America healthy again. And when you consider also that he wants to deregulate efficacy tests, and sort of, it's quite unsettling. And if you look at the people that he says inspired him in developing his views on deregulation, there's some of these figures that I note in the article that essentially state that big pharma should be responsible for the clinical testing of their own products, which is totally bonkers. And supposedly the ambition of the Make America Healthy Again movement is to take big pharma out of the regulation, take big pharma out of the FDA and that revolving door, and things of that nature.
Jim O'Neill has a long history of pushing policies that benefit big pharma while undermining public safety. As a Bush-era HHS official, he helped justify emergency use authorizations and expand government stockpiling of drugs under BARDA. Later, he joined Peter Thiel's firms, investing in failed biotech ventures like Ubiome. Now, he wants to eliminate efficacy testing for drugs and vaccines, giving pharmaceutical companies free rein to market unproven products. He also sits on the board of a company promoting aluminum injections as an Alzheimer's treatment, despite aluminum's known neurotoxic effects and RFK Jr.'s warnings. Whitney believes that O'Neill's agenda is clear, and deregulation benefits the biotech industry while leaving public health at risk. Anyway, guys, before we go, if you want to stay most up to date on the crypto and Bitcoin world, subscribe to my daily 5-minute crypto newsletter. It's a concise resource for the latest expert predictions, breaking news, and top on-chain analysis, trusted by over 50,000 subscribers for insightful crypto investment information. Don't miss out on the opportunity to stay informed in the crypto market. The link is in the description below. I hope you all enjoyed today's video and that it gave you some value. I'll see you all at the next one, and as always, all the best.